Some video games are destined to become big releases, whether it's because they're from a beloved franchise or they're hyped up so much that people just can't help but to be interested. On occasion though, some more obscure games will absolutely take the internet by storm for a good couple of months, becoming virtually impossible to avoid and spawning a whole new crop of memes in their wake. Whether this is thanks to streamers, social media, or some combination of the two, these titles wind up finding a much larger audience than anyone could have anticipated. These are what's known as viral video games, so named because they spread like, well, a virus, and are just about everywhere, only to fade into obscurity for most folks in a relatively short time. There are plenty of titles that could qualify for this list, especially as streaming has gotten more and more popular over the years, but we've narrowed it down to just 10 to look at today. Just don't forget about this list as soon as it's over, please. I'm Ashton from TripleJump, and here are 10 video games that went viral. Number 10, Surgeon Simulator. Normally, watching botched medical procedures would be restricted to a gruesome TV show, and be objectively unpleasant to watch. Add in some wacky physics and a cutesy aesthetic, however, and you end up with the irresistible hilarity of Surgeon Simulator. Released in 2013, this incredibly inaccurate simulator has players step into the shoes of surgeon Nigel Burke as he performs procedures on an array of different bobs. They are thrown right in at the deep end, expected to perform heart surgery from the off and work their way up through the surgeon ranks until they find themselves operating on aliens. Yes, really, and becoming the best surgeon in the universe by the game's end. Of course, the title didn't go viral on its story alone, but instead because of the way players controlled their hands, or rather hand, and how hilarious the results were to watch. Since the mouse is used to change the position of the hand and different keys operate each digit, trying to get the appendage to do, well, anything really, is a labour of Herculean proportions. There was a second title, appropriately named Surgeon Simulator 2, as well as imitators trying to cash in on the flailing fun, but very few have become anywhere near as iconic as the original slapstick surgeon. Number 9, Happy Wheels. A never-ending source of rage and hilarity, Happy Wheels was a dominant presence on the internet thanks to its ragdoll physics, short levels, easy browser-based accessibility, and the sheer quantity of content that creators were able to get out of it thanks to all of these factors. In this title, that's sort of a racing game that doubles as a brutal and quite bloody platformer, players begin by picking one of the many characters, some of whom are using fairly conventional modes of transportation, such as bikes, and others who've seemed to grab whatever they had around that was convenient and had wheels. Also, Santa is here for some reason. After this, they are free to take their selected vehicle and human through any of the obstacle courses on offer. While there were some truly creative things that could be built with the level editor, some of the most popular iterations were the bottle run, sword throw, and spike fall. The game passed its 10th anniversary fairly recently and is seemingly still going strong, with plenty of user-based levels still being made to this day. However, at this point, it has pretty much faded from the public eye, and is unlikely to ever return to the height of popularity it enjoyed in its early years. Number 8, Trombone Champ. The most recent release on this list, 2022's Trombone Champ, may be a newcomer to the world of viral video games, but its addictive tooting gameplay saw it memed all over the internet and brought this indie title squarely into the spotlight. Perhaps one of the most unique rhythm games ever, Trombone Champ allows players to pick up a virtual version of the titular brass instrument and jam along to any one of the 35 different songs, which range from classical tunes to remixes. The slide, which adjusts the pitch, is controlled by moving the mouse up and down, and players can play a note by using either a mouse button or any key on their keyboard. Don't let the relatively simple sounding gameplay fool you though. This dooting simulator takes a lot of concentration, leading to a horrible wailing caterwaul if done incorrectly, which will be what happens more often than not. With that said though, it's this very same ridiculous sounding result of imperfect slide placement that led to the game's popularity on social media. Though the title has seemingly already faded into obscurity less than a year after its release, it's still a good and funny time, and it's worth a look if you're in the market for a unique rhythm experience. Number 7, Slender, the 8 Pages. If there's one thing the internet loves, it's a good creepypasta. Preferably with loads of Alfredo sauce and garlic bread and... oh, is anyone else getting hungry all of a sudden? Anyway, one of the icons of the horror meme universe is Slender Man, the tall, well-dressed chap with an unsettling number of equally unsettlingly long appendages. This inevitably led to him starring in a game all of his own. And in 2012, Slender the 8 Pages was unleashed on the gaming public. In this first-person survival horror experience, players find themselves lost in the worst woods it's possible to be lost in, home of the eponymous Slender Man, who will stalk them through the dark over the course of the game. The 8 pages of the title are found throughout the forest, stuck onto the sides of trees, vehicles, and various structures, and players have to collect them all if they have any hope of escaping the forest. One massive issue, though, is that with each collected page, Slenderman becomes more active. Becoming incredibly popular thanks to video creators, this sensation eventually morphed into the larger title Slender the Arrival, which achieved a moderate amount of success as well. Unfortunately though, by the time that showed up, the formula had become stale thanks to imitators, and the original has mostly been relegated to the annals of history. Number 6. Pokemon Go. A game that caused as many accidents as it did accidental leg days, Pokemon Go was an award-winning formula that took the world by storm upon release. Thanks mostly to it being a mobile game, as well as being linked to one of the most beloved video game franchises of all time, the AR experience, Pokemon Go, allowed everyone to come face to face with some of their favourite iconic creatures, letting them finally live their dream of capturing small animals and having them fight against one another for sport. For a good chunk of time after the game's release in 2016, it was impossible to go anywhere without seeing large herds of people either standing eerily still or moving around very specific spots, phones out in front of them, as they all hoped to catch the virtual creatures or take over the gym in that area. This unfortunately caused as many issues as it did benefits for the community, as folks got a little too invested in chasing down their chosen critters and often wandered into danger, which led to more than a few traffic-related incidents and even some deaths. Pokemon Go is appropriately still going, but it's fair to say that, especially after 2020 and its aftermath, its time in the spotlight has diminished significantly. Number 5. QWOP. One of the earliest games ever to go viral, Marathon Runner QWOP and the frustration that came with it were virtually inescapable in the late 2000s and early 2010s. The title comes directly from the controls of the game, as the Q and the W keys are linked to the avatar's right and left thighs, and O and P are linked to the calves. Using these keys to control the game is just as hard as it sounds. More often than not, turning the 100-metre race the players are meant to compete in into a 0.4-metre shuffle, or even causing them to run backwards by accident. If players can get to grips with the complicated controls and the way both gravity and inertia interact with the limbs, they can complete the race, but QWOP wouldn't have gained the notoriety it did if it was that easy. This one simple browser game likely gave rise to a whole load of other frustrating simulator games, including the previously mentioned Surgeon Simulator, but the ease of acquiring QWOP and its popularity, conveniently coinciding with YouTube's massive traction at the time, were truly something special. Number 4. Facade. Long before AI started being associated with horrific many-fingered hands and chat programs that added 3 extra steps to a Google search, there was the free downloadable interactive fiction game sensation, Facade, that became especially famous for its nonsensical conversations. This particular AI-controlled experience primarily used natural language processing in order to spur the story forward. Play starts as the protagonist shows up at Trip and Grace's house, a couple who they are close to and who has invited them over for cocktails. Once they arrive though, it becomes obvious that the atmosphere is tense and that the couple are having a hard time. In order to get anywhere with the story, players type responses and questions out, which are then processed by the game's AI and used to progress the story in one of a number of ways, many of which will see someone, most often the player, thrown out of the apartment. There are still people attempting to use AI in games to this day, a trend that is sure to continue. But as is the case with Facade, the interesting concept these games start with almost always gives way to unintentional comedy. Maybe AI isn't as intelligent as we thought after all. Number 3. Five Nights at Freddy's. Typically, when they become viral sensations, games still stick to just one entry, even if they continue to get updates, because the majority of the population is gone in such a short amount of time. Our next entry, though, spawned an entire franchise, a ton of merchandise, and even its own movie. Five Nights at Freddy's, or FNAF, if you want to get acronyms that sound like sneezes about this, burst onto the horror game scene in 2014, and shows no sign of stopping anytime soon. The first game keeps it relatively simple, with players stepping into the shoes of Mike Schmidt, recently hired at Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria as a nighttime security guard. Seems like an odd thing to require for a knock-it-off Chuck E. Cheese, but these are no ordinary animatronics. They roam the halls at night, making their way towards the player as they monitor the security cameras and close the booth doors if the twisted creatures get too close. I know you've got to earn money somehow, but after that first stressful shift, I'd be burning the place to the ground, personally. Although the franchise is still going strong, its success pales in comparison to the sheer phenomenon that was the first FNAF title. Number 2, Among Us. For most of 2020, people were cooped up inside their homes, looking for ways to pass the time and connect with friends and family virtually. As such, multiplayer games became more important than ever before, and Animal Crossing New Horizons in particular bore a lot of weight when it came to keeping people entertained and connected. One of the most breakout viral sensations of that time, however, has to be Among Us. And though it was released in 2018, this multiplayer social deduction game didn't get its time in the spotlight until 2 years later. At the start of each round, each of the players is assigned a role, either crewmate or imposter, with the former going around the map completing relevant tasks, and the latter using sabotage and murder to stop them. The concept, similar to party game Werewolf, was a simple but effective formula that saw players feuding with each other and using all of their brain power as they tried to figure out what was happening. However, as with many fads, Among Us died down relatively soon after it burst on the Twitch and YouTube scene in mid-2020. While there are still many people who play the game regularly, and updates are ongoing, the heyday of calling anything mildly out of place sus has definitely been and gone. And number 1, Flappy Bird. Love it or hate it, Flappy Bird is undoubtedly one of the most iconic viral video games ever, as its simple but addictive premise was tailor-made for gaming on the go, and left such an impression that even those less familiar with the gaming scene likely gave it a try at its peak popularity. It released in 2013, but fully took off early the next year, and not in the jerky manner of the titular bird, but rather more like a rocket. Its simplistic gameplay boils down to the player tapping on the screen to make the bird, Fabby, ascend, or doing nothing to watch it plummet towards the ground, guiding the little fowl through a series of randomly placed gaps in a never-ending gauntlet of pipes. All sorts of different versions were made, either inspired by different systems or with other characters, and imitators were occasionally included in other games, but none could rival the original. Flappy Bird was eventually removed from mobile storefronts, much to the dismay of fans, as the creator Dong Nguyen was so concerned about its addictive nature that the associated guilt was affecting his sleep. It's probably for the best, then, that this game has more or less disappeared into obscurity, but its legacy is truly one for the ages.